Gracias. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our briefing this afternoon, focusing on the Assembly of First Nations following their meeting with Pope Francis earlier today. My name is Neil McCarthy. I'm the communications lead for the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops for the delegation here in Rome. We'd like to thank all of those who are with us in the room for joining us, and of course, all those who are watching via live stream back home for being with us here this afternoon. The format for this briefing will be slightly different than those from Monday, and the AFN has asked me to give you a brief overview of how things will unfold with the press briefing. So in just a moment, we will begin the briefing with prayer. Following the prayer, I will introduce those who are seated on stage. They will provide their reflections, and then we will take a moment to bring some additional delegates forward for brief remarks, and then we'll have our question period. And then we will conclude the briefing with a song. So this time I would invite Elder Fred Kelly, spiritual advisor, to come forward and lead us in prayer.
We question to know Morgan it took. Je vois ça ma condition because Jean Dalton Niviteo. I was just giving you my spiritual identity, our traditional people. That's all they need to know about me, and then they can determine what that means. Before I do the opening invocation, I would like to take the couple moments over here to congratulate the leaders who made their presentation so eloquently and so illuminating and illustrious. I also want to acknowledge our elders who have come here carrying the wisdom of the ages from the different nations of our peoples on Turtle Island, the rich diversity of languages, lifeways, and cultures, as we call them in the mainstream. And it is appropriate that I also acknowledge the fact if we're in for truth and reconciliation. I do not make any political statements. I'm here as a spiritual advisor. But speaking about truth and reconciliation, I spoke to you in my original language, one that was suppressed for quite some time. I'm also thankful and gratitudinous of the opportunity to say my invocation to you in both languages, English and my own language, because that too was suppressed for quite some time. But I'm not going to go into any deep on that. I'm just keeping track, bearing in mind what the backdrop here says, walking toward healing and reconciliation. And so I shall now say my prayer. Gishemarito, migos sabagit niya gumamida chabauji tiang. Jivegagi stagos yang oesa huma. Maigi akingi yang oasa gai fonja ya watagoe anedgagi fotos shuat. Oesa geget badurchaje menaji huichindiat. I offer my invocations, Great Spirit, to you to look kindly upon us on this happy occasion when our people, the beautiful people of Turtle Island, representing different cultures, different lifeways, to come and meet with the people whose ancestors sailed across the waters over which we flew. And as I mentioned to His Holiness this morning, the vision unfolded over his head, whereby the eagle that looks after our lands and our peoples met and flew together with the white dove that flew upon Christianity, and especially as noted by the Catholic Church. I respect all religions. I respect all spiritualities. So it is an honor to acknowledge the one Creator, to which there are many paths, but yet they all lead to that one. And so I acknowledge the Creator. Thank you very much for allowing us to be here with these beautiful people, the beautiful messages, the recipients of these messages, that they will spread the word in the four directions of our people, that it be heard in the four skies and the four earths, and that peace and reconciliation do in fact take place. My dear God, dear Creator,
Thank you so much, Elder Kelly. At this time, I'd like to introduce those who are on the stage with us this afternoon who will be sharing brief remarks. To my left, we welcome Regional Chief Gerald Antoine, who is leading the Assembly of First Nations delegation here to Rome. To his left, we welcome Kupki Roseanne Kasimir. Next, we welcome Grand Chief Mandy Gomasti. We are also pleased to welcome Youth Delegate Rosalie Labillois. Finally, representing the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, we have Archbishop Richard Smith and Bishop Raymond Poisson. So again, thank you all for being with us. And at this time, I'd like to hand things over to Regional Chief Antoine to share his remarks.
Masi, Kasimir jo sanan aratane on. Katse jushu and I jushu say masi near the senator. Ka jo sheheda si shehera you jown did I. Eji guys or let's say was a move close at the go. Kai da shandas at the go da. Eji should masi near the senator. Just to share with you, for those people that haven't been taught my language, bonjour and hello. It's good to see each one of you today, and thank you for being here. Thank you for a special day as we've been given, and also the breath of life that we all been given today. There's some things that have unfolded for both of us, and it's something that we need to talk about. And that's why this is a special day today that's been given to us. Earlier on today, after our visit with the Holy Father, when we were there, just to introduce the meeting between ourselves and the Holy Father, I explained and I illustrated a very special piece, a masterpiece. In the Sistine Chapel, there's a drawing right in the middle of the roof, and it's right in the ceiling up there, right in the middle. You have an image, painting of two people putting their hand together like this. And what I saw there and how I feel today is that we're at that particular point. And it is the work of divine powers that allow us to be able to come together at this point to truthfully share a story from our own lens. And I'd like to thank the people over here to allow us to be able to visit and also to be able to talk to one of your representative, Pope Francis. So, as I've shared with you just briefly, I am Gerald Antoine, and my spirit name is Tena Tutsi Ewoendi, which means the man that calls a loon. I wanted to share some things with you just to begin opening our press conference. I have amazing people here with me, amazing members of my family here with me that will simply and also elegantly, preciously, sacredly share with you how they see things. The First Nation delegation, they're sitting here with us and on the podium here, would like to express our deepest gratitude to His Holiness, Pope Francis, and also the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops that come from our home across the ocean, for supporting and facilitating our presence at this audience. It's a very special day. It is also a truly historical milestone in the journey of our original nation of families. And it's also a milestone for the journey of reconciliation which the Catholic Church is going to be journeying us on. We very much hope that these discussions will be the beginning of continued dialogue and partnership in which we can learn from the past and share our vision for a hopeful future. The people that I've been leading here, I am extremely proud of how they came with me and how they worked with me and also how they presented the messages to the Holy Father. Our delegation is comprised of First Nation representatives from every region. It includes residential school survivors, family members of survivors, leaders, elders, youth, and also spiritual advisors from several different nations. As the original nation of families, our culture and also our spirituality are fundamental to our identity and our relationships with each other as well as with Mother Earth. In this way, we have lots of things and many things to offer humanity. It is with this common grounding in faith that we meet to discuss the origins and also the impacts of the residential school, and also how we can move forward in a positive way to create a path which will help us to go forward, which will address the legacy of this residential school and also the origins of that. And we're hoping that it will bring about reconciliation, dignity, respect, trust, healing, and justice for our original nation of families. So today it's a very special divine moment, and I have other people here with me that I would like to introduce. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my fellow Chief, Kukpi Roseanne Kasimir.
Thank you for the introduction, Regional Chief Antoine. Very much appreciated. So for over 100 years, our peoples have been dealing with the devastating impacts of residential school system. Generations of First Nations families have grappled with the lasting trauma of having their children taken away to institutions which strip them of their Indigenous identities, culture, language, and where many suffered severe forms of abuse. We cannot allow the trauma and abuse our peoples have suffered at residential schools to continue, to impact our future generations. We must chart a new and positive course based upon revitalization and reclamation of our identity, culture, laws, and spirituality. The United Nations General Assembly proclaimed the period 2022 to 2032 as the International Decade of the Indigenous Languages. So during the International Decade, global attention on the critical situation of many Indigenous languages will be raised at international, regional, and national levels, and resources will be mobilized for the preservation, the revitalization, and promotion of Indigenous languages. We urge the Catholic Church to acknowledge its role in residential schools and the loss of Indigenous languages, and to join us by actively supporting us with human and financial resources for the revitalization and promotion of our languages and culture as a foundation for reconciliation and healing. Since the first delegation's audience with Pope Benedict in 2009, significant progress has been made with respect to greater understanding of the legacy of residential schools and how Canada can rebuild the relationship with First Nations. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada published its final report, and with it made 94 calls to action for reconciliation between Canada and Indigenous peoples. The mandate of the TRC was to document the history and lasting impacts of the residential school system on Indigenous students and their families, and provided residential school survivors with an opportunity to share their experience during public and private meetings held across the country. The TRC emphasized the need to educate the public about the impacts of residential schools and established the 10 principles for the truth and reconciliation. There are 10 principles, which affirms that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is the framework for the path to reconciliation. The 10 principles emphasize that reconciliation is a process of healing relationships that requires truth, sharing, apology, and commemoration that acknowledges and redresses past harms. Greater commitment is needed for the full implementation of all 94 calls to action. As we begin the journey to reconciliation, it is vital that the Catholic Church and First Nations peoples have the opportunity to share the truth of the past and for the Church to apologize for the wrongs that have been committed and to commemorate the strength and the resilience of First Nations peoples who have suffered because of the residential school system. On September 30th, 2021, Canada recognized the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Orange shirts and flags with the message, Every Child Matters were displayed during many marches, commemorations, and ceremonies held across the country and attended by First Nations and non-First Nations peoples alike. There was an outpouring of support from all Canadians who are learning about the truths of what occurred at the residential schools and the lasting impacts these institutions have had. This first commemoration of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was particularly poignant, given the recent discovery of unmarked graves of children found at former residential school sites. This has been a very difficult time for so many First Nations people as we seek to find the truth of what happened to our children, our loved ones, our family, and community members who never returned home from the residential schools. It has reminded us that there is still much truth to be uncovered and even greater healing that is needed. It'll take many years to assess the impact of the discovery of the unmarked graves that will have on each of us. Many First Nations have just started the process of undertaking ground-penetrating radar and searches and conducting investigations of grave sites. Our loved ones buried in these graves must be identified and returned and embraced by their homelands, their communities, and their families. There is a significant role the Catholic Church can play in assisting in the return of our children by supporting the disclosure of records and documents in its possession. Access to all of the records and documents will help to identify our children and may bring closure and healing to the many families and communities whom for so long have grieved the loss of their loved ones without knowing the truth of what happened. As our communities continue to search for their loved ones, our peoples are re-experiencing the trauma that residential schools have been inflicted. There is an increased and urgent need for mental health and cultural support. It is imperative that the Catholic Church take responsibility, make amends, and help those who have been hurt by the legacy of residential schools. This necessarily includes making reparations. Redress is needed for individuals to address their own trauma in a positive and healing way. We respectfully ask that the Catholic Church support the path to healing by providing the appropriate redress and reparations to First Nations peoples. Every child matters. And now I will introduce Grand Chief Mandy Bell.
Aguni Mandigal, Charles Makan, Sheet Notin, Mishanu Wajemadi. Thank you, Regional Chief. Thank you, Cookby. I would like to first take a moment to acknowledge one of our delegates who was not able to be with us today, Marlene Thomas from Prince Edward Island. We wish her well in her recovery. Unfortunately, Marlene fell ill. I'd also like to thank Bishop Smith and Bishop Poisson for joining us today. Before I begin, I would like to explain the purpose of these snowshoes that are here. In Cree language, they're called samaj. My youth Grand Chief traveled with these snowshoes to show that our culture and our language is still alive and still practiced. Many of our children take their first snowshoe walk guided by our elders. These snowshoes were handmade by Elder Saunders Wishchi from the Cree territory. I'd like to express my thanks to him. I'd also like to quote my youth Grand Chief, Adrian Nipash Gunner, who wishes to present these snowshoes as a gift to the Pope, not to glorify him, but to remind him that we are still here and that our Cree culture and our language still lives. Je vais livrer une portion de mon message en français pour les nations autochtones de Québec. J'aimerais vous dire bonjour. L'action 58 du Commission de vérité et réconciliation demande le pape de présenter une excuse aux survivants, leurs familles et leurs communautés pour les actions de l'Église catholique romaine dans leur rôle des actions spirituelles, culturelles, émotionnelles, physiques et sexuelles, formes d'abus contre les nations autochtones, les Inuits et les enfants métis durant leur temps dans les écoles pensionnements dirigées et aménagées de l'Église catholique. Many pensionnats et survivants ont dit qu'ils ont un désir d'écouter le pape Francis, d'offrir une excuse de la part de l'Église roman-catholique, une excuse qui est nécessaire pour notre guérison et de commencer sur une marche de réconciliation et de regarder la vérité de ce qui s'est passé dans ces écoles, de aussi livrer de la justice pour les Premières Nations. Une excuse de l'Église pour les choses qui sont passées, les choses, ça va nous démontrer de l'acceptance de leur part, d'ouvrir la porte pour guérison et aussi pour réconciliation. We wish to express our gratitude for His Holiness Pope Francis's commitment to visiting Canada in the new year. We wish to invite him to visit former residential school sites, meet with First Nations survivors, families, leaders, and provide an apology to our people. A meaningful apology that will not only include acknowledgement of the harms done by the Catholic Church, but also an admission of responsibility. This will also demonstrate the Catholic Church's commitment to plan for action in partnership with First Nations people. While forgiveness is a personal choice, we cannot ignore the power of an apology and the act of forgiveness that demonstrates compassion, in which we are able to show that we are transforming anger and hurt into a healing process of peace, love, and freedom. An apology is necessary to repair the relationship between First Nations people and the Catholic Church. We hope that the Catholic Church will support this process of transformation in its relationships with First Nations, and as a first step, offer the words of an apology so that many of our people can hear, "I am sorry." As First Nations people, we believe that we must work together to build a better world for our future generations. We think 7 generations ahead, and we wish to ensure that our actions will benefit our children's children. We envision a world where our communities have healed from trauma of the past and embrace the future with capacity and resources to overcome the many challenges that our people face. Our children and our youth, as emerging leaders, are truly our legacy to the world. We need the appropriate support to heal from intergenerational trauma created by residential schools. They need to take the necessary actions now to ensure that they will inherit a world which accepts their unique perspectives and embraces their distinct cultures, languages, and spirituality. Our children and youth must grow up in a society where their culture and Indigenous spirituality is not only tolerated, but embraced and uplifted by the same institutions that sought to eliminate them. To initiate this step forward, our delegation has presented the Holy Father with specific items. These included moccasins, a beaded brooch, an eagle feather, a black ash basket, literature, and a cradle board. Of significant importance is the cradle board. It is a symbol of every Indigenous child who went to residential school, and for those who survived, and more importantly, for those who did not return home. The Holy Father has now been tasked with the responsibility to care for this cradle board overnight and to reflect on the messages delivered by our delegates. If he is truthful in his commitment to the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, then he will follow through with our request to return the Cradle Board to our delegation at the general audience tomorrow. We stated to His Holiness, how you treat this Cradle Board will demonstrate how you treat our people in the future. By returning the Cradle Board to the delegation, he will demonstrate his commitment to our people. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Grand Chief, and thank you to Regional Chief Antoine and to Elder Fred Kelly and our spiritual advisors for always guiding us in a good way. I first off would like to acknowledge that I am an intergenerational survivor, and it was an immense honor to be here to accompany our former residential school students along their journey and to hear them speak their truths and to share their messages, and also to be here as a youth delegate, and also to thinking about our time here and our experience. I hope our message continues to echo back home on Turtle Island. Fundamental changes are needed for this to occur in a positive and meaningful way. The TRC called on all faith groups to repudiate the concepts used to justify European sovereignty over Indigenous lands and peoples. Respect for First Nations rights and obligations must be demonstrated through the denunciation and repudiation and the abolishment of all colonial edicts, such as the papal bull doctrines of superiority, including discovery and terra nullius. It is time to shed the destructive influences of outdated doctrines and laws of the past, and for our future generations, embrace an inclusive vision of the future that recognizes and encompasses First Nations rights and obligations as a part of reconciliation. Our strengths as a First Nations people have always been our resiliency, our interconnectedness, and our relationship with Mother Earth, and our deep and abiding spirituality. It is our grounding in our cultures and dedication to building a better future for our people that brings us here today. We want to acknowledge the harm residential schools have caused, heal from the past, and build a new relationship. We want our future generations of First Nations people to understand what happened at residential school, but not carry with them the burden of the trauma residential schools have caused. Residential schools were a dark chapter in our history, but they are not the whole story. Much of our story has yet to be written. When His Holiness Pope Francis travels to Canada, he will no doubt see the legacy of the residential school system and the hurt that it has caused, but he will also see the vibrancy and the richness of our cultures, the strength of our nations, and our commitment to building a better and brighter future for our peoples. We very much hope and implore him to offer an apology and also join us as we begin this new chapter on the path of healing and reconciliation. I come from the Peace and Friendship Treaty area, and my dad would always say, there's no peace and we have yet to find our friends. And I think right now the work that we have done and the work of all those who have come before us, we're really setting that path forward, and we're hoping that our non-Indigenous relatives back home on Turtle Island, hear this message and that it's being echoed within our homelands. And that they begin to accept and honor and respect us as the true and rightful leaders of our homelands. And that they come along with us and learn that love that we have for our land and why we love it so much and the things that we do and how important it is to us. So, Walalio, welcome to Nokma.
So I'm Archbishop Richard Smith, the Archbishop of Edmonton. Pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation to join you at this press briefing. I don't want to take a whole lot of time because that's taking time away from yourselves and your testimonies, and I don't want to do that, but I will take this opportunity simply to offer just a brief reflection on my experience this morning as, I would say, a privileged witness to an historic moment. I'm part of a small group of bishops, together with Bishop Poisson. I've been working together with our Indigenous partners for quite a few years now to get ready for this event. And it has been an honor to be able to facilitate what has taken place this morning and finally to see it actually happen. I'm full of respect for the delegates that came forward after obviously having taken a great deal of time to prepare for this moment and to witness how you came to meet the Holy Father deeply aware of the heavy responsibility that has been entrusted to you by your people to speak and to share with the Holy Father what you felt needed to be said. It was a forthright presentation, a truthful one, and I would say a respectful one. And it was a privilege and a blessing and an honor for me to be participant in that. I would also want to say that I was deeply moved by the response of the Holy Father. It's clear that he listened deeply. It's clear that he wanted this encounter to happen. And it's clear that he himself was profoundly moved by what he heard. And at the end of the day, or at the end of the session, he shared that, look, I've listened to this, I've heard this, it has touched me deeply. And now, as had been requested, he's going to be praying and pondering deeply through the rest of this day and into this evening in preparation for the encounter tomorrow. So thank you for the partnership. Thank you for inviting us into your lives. Thank you for helping us really, and welcoming us to be partners with you on this journey. And I can assure you that I and my brother bishops do want to journey with you. Thank you.
That's the French note. Thank you very much, everyone, for especially for this meeting of this morning. We took time this morning. There's no stress with the agenda. It was very generous from the Holy Father also. And as Archbishop Smith said, it's because you prepare yourself very well for that. So thank you very much. Et je voudrais tout simplement attirer notre attention sur ce climat, hein, l'atmosphère, how it was going this morning. D'abord, la prière, comme nous venons de faire d'ailleurs. Je pense que nous avons beaucoup à apprendre avec vous de la manière de se rencontrer. A prayer together to begin a meeting, that's a spirit between us, different spirit, and it's not the usual way in our modern world, if I can say that. So, deux gestes qui ont été posés qui, il me semble, ce matin se répondaient et qui donnent bien le ton du climat que nous avions. Pour ce qui est des paroles, nous en avons entendu, mais le climat, on a remis au Saint-Père, vous avez remis au Saint-Père de tout petits mocassins, hein, baby shoes. Et ça vient nous redire que nous portons dans cette délégation le souci, le souvenir, la mémoire vivante de ceux et celles pour qui nous sommes ici, avec cette mémoire des écoles résidentielles. Par contre, en même temps, vers la fin du rendez-vous, vous avez remis au Saint-Père une paire de chaussures fait main, mais à sa pointure à lui. Et vous le lui avez dit, that's the good size of shoes for you, Holy Father, because we want you walk with us, que vous puissiez avec nous marcher. Et je pense qu'il l'a très bien compris. Alors, merci beaucoup et poursuivons la route.
Thank you to all of our speakers for their very thoughtful and heartfelt words. We very much appreciate that. We are going to do a little bit of a switch over with some of the seating, and we will invite 3 additional delegates to join us on stage for the next portion of our program. We are going to be welcoming Phil Fontaine, Dr. Wilton Littlechild, and spiritual advisor Elder Fred Kelly. So we'd invite them to come to the podium as we just switch up the seats here. And I'll let Chief Antoine will pass the microphone over to each of our new guests to allow them to share some brief remarks before we open things up for questions. Thank you.
Merci. I'd like to thank our ancestors for being who they were, modeling the way for us, and for mentoring our elders. I also like to thank all our elders at home that have been involved with our way of life and also in our multi-dimensional way of providing our own educational processes. I'd like to thank our elders for that. We have 3 of our elders here with us who were also part of our delegation, and I'd like to also give them an opportunity to share with you. Let's see. I'd like to call on Chief Willie Littlechild. Willie's been involved in many capacities, and also he was one of a fast runner when he was younger. He also managed to do the work, the footwork over at the international level. So with that, I'd like to call on our elder.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nigan. Kakyo katamskad now, asemina pego. En alas komtego ngetuan. Ikin toat sihtaak. Tan salma getsina awiak kamaskamit. Utoa simsa. Eisi usikohit. Tan salma getsina awiak eha was siut eutnit. Wakumagana. Ugawipana. Uhtawipana. Tan salma getsina awiak eisosikohit. Kamaskamit utoa simsa. Maga moipego eikin tau mtoa tsihtaak euganma. Kiko an maste eki totamik apsis ngatoten. Maikant mohte on sigas on maskotsi sikohtsi. Yksi tatamskadnao kakyo in an askumtakuk. I bring you greetings in my language to reflect on a couple of thoughts that came to mind with this. And it's about a bundle of rights that came to mind as I was listening. You see, for 40 plus years now, I've been on this walk to Rome. First, as a young lawyer working on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples for 27 years. 8 of those years was us arguing with states for the recognition of our people as human beings. It took us 8 years to get the UN to agree that indeed indigenous peoples are human beings. And I remember going home and used to report to the elders after every journey to Geneva or New York at the UN to report back to them. And it was always a ceremony before we left and a ceremony when we came back. And I remember telling the elders, yes, I just came back from Geneva and New York. We're still trying to get a recognition as human beings. And the old man said, well, what are we then? Are we a herd of elk, deer? What are we then if we're not human beings? I know why they don't want to recognize us as human beings, he said. And this is old man, he didn't go to law school. He said, if they recognize us as human beings, they're going to have to admit we have human rights. And he hit it right on the head. So another time, I sat back and I thought, that was the longest debated declaration in UN history. Why did it take that long? And I remember one meeting where we were starting to argue among each other, and one of the delegates made an observation. I didn't recognize the importance of it right away. But he said, you know what? We've been sitting here arguing among ourselves, and I think I know why. We didn't begin our meeting with a prayer. So they said, Willie, you go see the chairperson and ask them if they can allow us to open a meeting with a prayer. You see, the United Nations works with bundles of rights. There are 2 international conventions: economic, social, and cultural rights, and civil and political rights. 5 sets of rights in 2 bundles. So I went to old man and I said, I've been asked to ask you if you could honor us with an opening prayer. And he said, I'm very humbled that you would ask me. But I want you, before I do it, listen very, very carefully to the sound of my voice. Listen very, very carefully at the words that I'm going to use. Because I am the last living member in my nation who speaks our language. So he began, when he was given the floor, to pray. And a month later, I got a call, and a gentleman at the end of the line said, the old man died. And I said, what old man? Remember the old man that prayed for us at the UN? He just died. And it was like somebody hit me right in the gut, because I heard a language die. I heard an indigenous language die. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So I thank the chief for bringing the decade, which started this January, on Indigenous languages. Early in our TRC work, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission work, the second year, we issued an interim report to test the waters. Is Canada going to take our report serious? So we identified 4 assaults of the residential school policy. It was an assault on us as Indigenous peoples, our language, because it was prohibited. Secondly, it was assault on our family because of separating children from their parents. It was an assault on our cultures. You see us wearing headdresses. That was not allowed in residential schools, to show any cultural manifestation that you're Indigenous, whatever nation you came from. And also, the family was assaulted. The community was assaulted. So we issued a temporary report just to see if there was going to be any uptake on this upcoming report. And I tell you that story because I chaired a commission for 2.5 years on the justice system and how it impacts First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And before I started the commission, I asked myself, I wonder how many studies have been done on justice. And I found out that there had been 33 studies done with over 3,000 recommendations. And yet, we were still filling up the prisons. Why? So, during one of the meetings of the 3 of us, I said, let's be bold. Let's think bold. When I went to ask the chairperson if we could open a meeting with a prayer, he said to me, Mr. Littlechild, you know we don't pray at the United Nations. And I said, well, it's actually just an invocation. It's a thanksgiving. And just as someone said yesterday, God works in mysterious ways. 4 elders had brought their drum to the UN. So I went back to the meeting and I said, we can open a meeting with a prayer. The elders were really happy they brought their drums. And by the way, she said, how long is this going to take? You have 3 minutes. And the elders were really happy. They came in and they were singing a prayer song. And she poked me on the elbow. It's already 7 minutes. How long are they going to take? And I said, well, they're elders. We have to respect them and let them finish. So she did. And the story concludes with a new right for humankind. Because the day after, the United Nations started talking about spirituality. And indeed, they decided on a new right, a 6th right, that the human being has a right to spirituality. And that's what our elders brought to the humankind. Pope Francis, I was here for his first Mass, and he talked about his concerns about climate change. And yes, we addressed it this morning. Same thing happened. We asked an elder to address the UN, and you can imagine a room of nearly 200 world leaders, ambassadors, prime ministers, presidents. And the old man got up to speak, and he said, "Who among you is going to argue for my brother, the fish that swims in the waters? Who among you is going to argue for my brother, the bird that flies in the skies? Who among you is going to argue for my brother and sister, the four-legged, that dies so that we can live? Who among you is going to speak for clean air and clean water?" Well, guess what happened? The next day, the UN decided to talk about rights to environment, environmental rights. You see, those are two small contributions to humankind that the indigenous elders do not get credit for. Because now there's talk about climate change, sustainable development. Another meeting we noticed there's an exclusion on the agenda of women, children. So we made sure the next meeting on the agenda was the topic of women and how it was cross-cutting every issue because they were being impacted by every issue. Children were added to it. But for many years thereafter, a third group that had been excluded was added to the UN agenda, and that's persons with disabilities. And it was our people who brought that to the table. So we just didn't go to the UN to complain. We offered gifts to humankind as indigenous peoples. So when the issue of concluding our Truth and Reconciliation report came, we asked each other, the three of us, Justice Sinclair, Dr. Wilson, what were the 10 main teachings that we discovered over the last 6 years at that time, after 7,000 testimonies? And we concluded that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which took 40 years almost to get it adopted finally, to be the first principle for reconciliation. So I share a little bit of history with you because this has been a long walk to Rome. But finally, after many, many, many years, thank you to former National Chief Phil Fontaine and others who worked, Ken Young, I see, Kathleen, I saw last night, Ted, I saw him last night and this morning. People like that who blazed the trail. And the message was, go where there's no path and leave a trail for someone else. And that's what they have done. Elder Fred did that all week for us by saying prayer invocation, exercising a new right for humankind called prayer, spirituality. And the cradle for this morning that was challenged, in a sense, challenging, I will say. Because after all, this is about children. Someone said, we were only children when we were taken. So women, Indigenous women's rights came to be recognized. Indigenous children, after also 27 years, their rights came to be recognized at the UN. Persons with disabilities, Indigenous persons with disabilities. It was an Indigenous woman who broke the barrier on that. You know, you want to go to get money at the ATM, you push the button. Well, she was blind, and she couldn't withdraw her money from the ATM. So she sued the banks, and she won the case. And that's why every ATM now has Braille on the numbers, the buttons. Another contribution by Indigenous peoples. So I just want to tell those stories that we just didn't come and complain when we came over here. This morning, we didn't come just to complain. We offered solutions. We offered solutions for consideration by the Council of Bishops and His Holiness, Pope Francis. So with that, anyone who has been involved on this journey, this walk to Rome, thank you for your contributions. Thank you very much for the work that you did, the support that you gave, because it's been not just a one-way street. We talk about walking together. Has anyone ever tried to walk on a railway track? I don't see anyone. Well, I see one nodding. You know that if you try to walk on a railway track on a rail, you can walk for a while, and after a while you fall off. Get back on, and you walk, and you'll fall off again. But did you know that if your friend is on the other track, and if you hold hands together, you can walk for miles on that track without falling off. You know why? Because you're supporting each other. And that's what we need to do here on this journey towards healing and reconciliation.
I must say, earlier in my remark, I had mentioned to you that we have a lot to offer, and I'd like to thank our elder to also providing evidence of these opportunities that he may not have heard of or may not have realized. And so just to let you know that we're kind people. And but I'll see you after the meeting. Anyways, the next, I'd like to introduce the next elder, Phil Fontaine. He had been one of our leaders for many years, and just recently he had been our former APTN National chief. And when I was an intern at the Canadian Museum of Civilization, I had an assignment to catalog one of our photographers a collection of pictures, and I think in every picture I saw Phil. And so I had a real good specific description of Phil. And so, and also through that close-up, I really had a chance to be really privileged of being able to see where he had walked. And he is one of those elders that model the way for many of us. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Phil Fontaine. Merci.
Thank you, Regional Chief. Thank you, Dr. Littlechild. There isn't much I can add to Chief Littlechild's presentation. My goodness. You covered a lot of territory, and the best I can do here is to concur with the lessons that he taught us this afternoon. They arise from his work with the United Nations and then as Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Both outcomes were simply outstanding. The first, of course, had to do with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and then the 94 calls to action. Both are roadmaps for our people. And the maze before us, and that's what it is, in terms of securing our rights. We quite often need a map to take us from one point to the other. And the work that Chief Littlechild and Justice Sinclair and Dr. Marie Wilson, and then all of the many others that worked and supported the Chief in his work at the United Nations have provided us a way forward. And part of that, of course, is what transpired this morning at our encounter with the Holy Father. I was asked about my impressions or feelings about the meeting. I think it gave me a real sense of optimism that we're on the verge of finally turning the corner on this issue that's befuddled so many in the past. And we heard the Holy Father say to us very clearly, the Church is with you. And that's an incredibly important statement, because the next thing we will hear is, I am sorry. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And I don't know if it'll be that direct, the apology. And I'm also convinced that this very important moment in the lives of our people will take place on Canadian soil. And when Archbishop Gagnon was asked about that, his response was, very soon, before winter. And so before winter, of course, comes fall and the summer. I'm convinced it'll be the summer. And so that makes me extremely happy. Thank you.
Gomasti, as I looked further in those collection of photographs, I also noticed there were other people that were in these collections. And he was a little bit taller than Phil. And I was wondering, maybe there's a special shoe that he had, so I had to, however, the picture collection didn't cover those tracks. But however, in our delegation, he was one of the key people that really began to bring us together. And I saw why he was a little bit taller and have a very special gift of being able to connect with the ancient teachings. And it really helped us to ground ourselves with our own faith as the original nation of families. And this is some things that we also have to offer. So I'd like to also introduce our elder, Fred Kelly.
Miigwech Regional Chief, fellow panelists, respected panelists, Archbishop. My role in this delegation, and I'm honored to have been selected or designated by the national leadership of the Assembly of First Nations to come as a spiritual advisor. And it's often with great trepidation that I would accept a designation as a spiritual advisor. Because the truth has to be told quite often in brutal terms, and it's not often very pretty. For a person such as myself, weak as I am, I carry a lot of inherent resentment, but yet I fight with that every day. Why? Because I feel I have not done enough. My whole life has been spent fighting for fairness, justice, equality of our people. Reconciliation must fight systemic racism. Those of you in the press and the international front, you carry very interesting, sensational news about events that are taking place. And I ask you that I'm dedicating a moment of silence right now to our students that did not come home from the residential schools, having suffered many of the atrocities that I probably will not have time to get into. But that's not the purpose here, anyway. But I will take this moment of silence with you, if you will join me, not only for our students, but those people in the world who are starving, who are dying of thirst, who are being massacred, who have been murdered, such as our women, such as our girls who are lost and being molested as we speak, tortured for sexual gratification by somebody. I also take the time to ask you to join me in a moment of silence for those people that give us those flashbacks of news coverage, those children, those women, those men whose duty is to protect their families but are deprived of doing so in a meaningful way. And yet those women have to look after those children who are being bombarded as we speak in Ukraine. Please join me in a moment of silence. Miigwech, thank you. In the face of the atrocities going on in the world, it is hard to talk about reconciliation. It's almost like a cliche, as peace and harmony almost sounds like. And if I sound bitter, that's because truth is not always pretty. For a man to take on the position, or at least the role temporarily, of being a spiritual advisor in such circumstances is overwhelming. But also humbling at the same time when you get to sit with people like these two gentlemen sitting to my right. Phil Fontaine, my brother, who in my opinion is one of the most humblest human beings that I have ever met, and yet has done such great work towards justice. And he invited me to participate with him and sit with him, with his now partner, Kathleen Mahoney, who's also with you. Brilliant human beings. In my view, worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize for the work that they've done to start the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, the largest of its kind in Canada, if not the world, with ramifications that are now global. We find that the new Secretary of the Interior in the United States, Secretary Howland, the first Indigenous person to hold that position, a woman. Why do I sound surprised? Well, I am not surprised. I say it's about time. She is now starting her own investigation of the residential school issues in the United States, where the residential school system in Canada began in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where certain people that studied the issue in the United States came back with the glowing report for Canada to say the Americans have found the final solution to the Indian problem. And the solution is to kill the Indian in the child. It's hard to find any truth that might be pretty in that statement, in that policy, for that is what we suffered. I speak to you from personal experience of having attended residential schools. One, when I was 4.5 years old, being thrown literally into a residential school, the first experience I have is to have my braids shorn, my clothes changed, deloused, and beaten up for speaking my language, the only language that I know, while the people beating me up are speaking a different language amongst themselves. But we are prohibited from speaking our own language. Those are some of the experiences, and I won't do any more graphic details, except I do want to share with you that it is very difficult to talk about reconciliation in a truthful way in the mainstream concept of what truth might be, which might be pretty. When you are taught that your belief in the Creator is the way of the devil, when you are taught that Medewan, which I belong to, is the road to hell, when you are taught that your language is not worthy of speaking, therefore you have to be taught a different language. For a while in that state, I believe that my name was Merdi Cochon. That's what I was called. Slapped across the head several times when I cannot understand the reasoning. A little later on, with the Catechism, that the Catholic Church is the church of truth and the only true church. When I have a brother and sister attending a Presbyterian school and we say the Rosary in the month of May, and one decade is dedicated to the salvation of sinners and Protestants, almost synonymous. My brother, I got to pray for him. My father who died in a hit and run by a person who was drunk, but it was said that he was drunk. And I'm told by my catechism teachers, a person dying of mortal sin, because mortal sin also includes being drunk, but he was not drunk. But I live with that. He's in hell. My mother is also in hell, if not in purgatory. And you men out in the crowd here, I know how you feel. Not exactly because it's a personal sentiment, so unique, it is so personal. I cannot tell you that I fully understand, but my understanding is similar, but it's not identical. Because similar does not mean identical. When you love your mother so much that at the age that I'm at right now, you still remember your mother, you are still your mother's little boy, no matter how much you deny that. Those are those people that I'm told would be in hell. Lovely people who raised me in the best way that they thought, which was the traditional spirituality. So I speak to you today, having gone back to my traditions and my spirituality. And I speak to you then on the basis of the confessions of a born-again pagan. Because pagan simply means a non-believer. And for a long time I did not believe in any God who would be so cruel as to send me to hell for one moment of a mistake. I'm being taught that. And I will tell you that that is not the truth. The God I return to, the God that I love and adore, is a kind one, all forgiving. Despite your mistakes, still accepts you. It's amazing that I would be accepted back by somebody. That's how I came to hate myself. Ashamed that I was Indian, in brackets, because I am not. And one of these systemic pieces of racist legislation is still with us in Canada. It's called the Indian Act. Apartheid in South Africa was based on the Indian Act and the reserve system. Apartheid is gone now in South Africa. In Canada, we still have it, which controls our lives, which makes us prisoners of institutions. And when that didn't work, started to hurt our parents for not having their children in school until 1927, when it became an illegal matter, when my religion, my spirituality, my spiritual practices and I am telling you that my concept may be a twisted history, but this is my personal experience, my view of it. I speak of the indigenous apocalypse, and the four horsemen of the indigenous apocalypse is the missionary, the Indian agent, the policeman, and the game warden, who kept us in reserves, away from our traditional territories, away from their environment. In residential schools, experimentation goes on with our diets. 1942 to about 1947, experiments going on, which are time bombs for now epidemics in our societies, known as tuberculosis, cardiovascular diseases. But look, ladies and gentlemen, leadership just is what we have here. Phil Fontaine and the team, that he humbled me by asking me to advise on a spiritual basis in our traditions. And then from there, with the 5 elements, grew Truth and Reconciliation Commission, of which my brother Wilton Littlechild is a stellar member. And those have worldwide ramifications, because we now see New Zealand, Australia, also researching the issue of what happened in residential schools. I say these from the point of view of the difficulty of trying to face reconciliation, but I'm not in a position to make any accusations to the current members of the clergy. For I know now clearly it was not God that did that to me. It was the clergy. So what do we do about reconciliation? In my own humble way, I can tell you, and please accept my humble point of view on this. I recognize that there are people within the current clergy who suffer also from guilt, from shame of having been associated with the residential school system, which was not necessarily of their making. It was the system of terra nullius, discovery, where we are nothing but savages. We've come a long ways. So when I go to the Vatican and I'm able, From that little child who was 5 years old trying to figure out and try to understand who the Pope is and how powerful he is, and that he is infallible. Infallibility meant to me at that time, he's incapable of making mistakes. So therefore, what he is doing and what he's authorizing or partly perpetrating, maybe not directly, that must be the truth. To my realization, it is not. So we have to face that. But the bright side of it is, we have people, such as my friends over here to the left, who work very hard to make this delegation possible, could come to the Vatican and visit with His Holiness and face the facts as we see them, which will turn out, hopefully, into truth and ultimately to reconciliation. So what did we do as persons to try and live up to a different way? My brother Phil Fontaine and I adopted an archbishop. We love him, he loves us. He's in Regina, retired now. I won't name him out of respect because he has a story as well, and a beautiful story, but that's his story. It's a beautiful story, I assure you. But when I have the opportunity to come and visit His Holiness, and I ask my dear friend, Archbishop Smith, is it possible for me to light my pipe in his presence? I know I don't need permission to do my own spirituality, but out of respect for the premises in which I'm in, I ask. If it's part of your invocation, yes. Here you see, gentlemen, what was cast asunder as ways of the devil, this born-again pagan, holding a pipe, a sacred pipe. And I go to the Pope, and I raise my pipe in the 4 directions, do my invocations, and then I go to him and touch him on the head, touch him on the shoulder, touch him in the heart, touch him on his other shoulder, and whisper to him as I kiss him on the forehead, I love you. That is an honorable experience, to be able to tell another human being that you love that man. And then I sit back and listen with pipe in hand as these beautiful people tell their stories of the themes that they want to present to His Holiness, and he's listening carefully, attentively. I know he's got sciatica. I know he's getting frail in his old age. And I know what that's like. But here he is, the head of the church, who was anointed to succeed. The anointment of Jesus Christ that I read about as a child, being a holy person, telling him, upon this rock I will build my church. That is an honor. The question is not whether I believe in those stories. No more would I expect many of other orientations to believe in the stories that I tell in my spirituality, but nevertheless they are the belief systems. They constitute my spirituality, and that's where I'm coming from. And I said in my invocation, I respect all spiritualities, all religions, for there's only one God, as each and every one of you understands that God. I won't take it any further than that because I'm not here to proselytize or convert anybody. I'm here to share with you my story. And then I go back the second time. And I know that the presentations are being made. I'm not part of those presentations directly because the words were chosen very carefully in consultation with the people that they represent. It's not for me to make any commentaries one way or another, but to support the heart and spirit of the presentations. And so, at the end, before we left, I gave him a pair of moccasins. I went back to him. I gave him a pair of moccasins that told him, I did a little bit of background work. You were size 8s. These moccasins were made especially for you, that you would put them on spiritually, figuratively. These are not the words I spoke to him, but that's the intent. Because I find that I'm communicating with this holy man, and I'm not holy, but he is. But somehow I'm communicating with him. How is that? Because he is a human being with a heart and with compassion. I can communicate with that because I am a very humble, not as a virtuous person, but rather a person of very humble creation in nature. I'm an Anishinaabe. And I give him these moccasins, made out of moose hide, beautiful beads, and invite him, walk with us, and may the Creator and the Great Spirit and God, as we each understand, allow us to walk together in action towards reconciliation and healing. The spirit and intent I told you at my beginning, to us, the written word is one thing. To us, the spirit and intent is the true sentiment of the message that we are conveying as oral people that we are. And what that means, if you're looking for any nuances, they are very clear, and it does not need any academic credentials to understand that that is an invitation, because I also told him, and I told others, who kind of chuckled at this idea, that when I do this kind of a ceremony, we do it in the form of a feast. But that's part of the way we do our spirituality. We feast the ceremony. That is an invitation. To come to Turtle Island, a feast awaits you, Holy. And there, with the moccasins, if you so wear them, you may wear them figuratively, but you will be walking back on Turtle Island, whence you also came from. Those are the messages I'm conveying spiritually. And I also gave him a white feather. And that white feather, I gave him a spiritual name from our spiritual traditions. I told him in my language, you are now known as White Feather. To commemorate the eagle that has joined and now flies with the white dove towards peace and harmony, leading towards ultimate reconciliation and healing, that we may be true brothers and sisters, one by the Creator, the Great Spirit, God, as each one of us understands. Miigwech.
Masi, we come here as a family. We also shared as a family, and you've also experienced our family gatherings. And I'd like to thank you for your patience, and I'd like to thank our elders for feeding us with their words, and it's something that will nourish us from this day forth. And later on, at the end, we're going to be also providing you with dessert, so don't go away. We're going to call on, at the end, we're going to call on our grandmother to also share you with those dessert, and I think this will really be a piece of cake for each one of you. So with that,
Thank you, Chief Antoine, and thank you, Elder Fred Kelly and Phil Fontaine, Dr. Willie Littlechild. Very appreciative for your thoughtful words and insights and for helping to teach us and educate us this afternoon. I appreciate that we have been together for some time, so thanks to everyone for their patience. We will just take a few minutes if there are a couple of questions from the media, and I know that following this, if there's a desire to speak to someone one-on-one, there may be that opportunity. I know Jamie Monastersky from the AFN, who coordinates their media, is here. So if we do have a couple of questions, we would just ask you to raise your hand and please identify yourself. Let us know which outlet you're from and who you're directing your question to, and we'll just limit it to one question per journalist. Thank you.
Hello to all of you, and thank you. My name is Donna Sound. I'm with CTV National News. My question is for Phil Fontaine. Phil, okay, this is your second meeting, second Pope. You said that you're convinced that an apology will follow. What makes you so convinced that this one will give an official apology? And why? Yeah, why?
I just think the time is right. The world has been watching us for some time now, and the eyes of the world were upon all of us here this past week, and in large part because of what transpired in Kamloops with the discovery of the 215 unmarked graves. It shocked Canada out of its complacency with respect to the residential school issue. The news of the discovery went worldwide. And I was convinced at that point that the church had nowhere else to go in terms of moving forward with us than to do as it had been requested to do over and over again by various people, including our Prime Minister in 2017. And so when this particular encounter was planned and organized, the rallying cry was centered on an apology on Canadian soil. And there was no pushback in that regard. And when we found out that the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops were in negotiations with the 3 national Indigenous organizations, at least to me, it became abundantly clear that the Vatican, CCCB, working together, were prepared to apologize, through, of course, the Holy Father. And so that's where this matter stands now. We've presented our case, as was noted, eloquently and persuasively. And so the next step in this, we know the Pope, the Holy Father, is going to reflect on what he heard today and the previous 2 presentations. Reflect on all that he heard, and he's going to come back to us tomorrow. And he's not going to make a declaration. I'm going to Canada in July, and I'm going to go apologize in Winnipeg, though that would be ideal for me, right? Come to Canada, come to Winnipeg, apologize there. And Fred as well, right? So the signs are all in front of us, as far as I'm concerned, that the apology will come. And as I noted, as Archbishop Gagnon said, before winter time. And so I would expect that sometime this summer we will be paid a visit by the Holy Father, and he'll come to Canada to apologize. If that doesn't happen, I think I'll just stay in redneck country. Because then I'd be a complete fool, and I would be lying to people I care about. But I'm not a fool, and I don't intend on lying on this issue. Donna? Long-winded answer to a short question. Sorry.
Yes, over here.
If I may interject.
Sorry.
If the Pope, in fact, does come to Winnipeg, where I also happen to live, having visited Italy, where we're being fed with pasta and pasta and pasta, as I was promised, yes. My disappointment with Italy and its pasta is there's no Pizza Hut here. In Winnipeg, we have lots of them.
Yep. Over, yeah, to the left, Erica, first, actually. Sorry, we just acknowledged it. We'll come back to you after. Just, yep, right here.
I'm Martin Himmel from TVO Ontario. I wanted to address this question to Fred Kelly. You talk very strongly about reconciliation and the need for it and how to approach it. Is there a reconciliation? Is there a need for accountability and justice, maybe justice to bring to account perpetrators who are still alive? Was this in any way raised or as a factor in your idea of reconciliation?
Thank you for the question. There's you gave me a hole there, which is I call an elusive hole, and it simply has to do with if there is in fact justice in Canada, that's a system for the judicial system to deal with. I understand that there are investigations going on. I understand that there are grounds for adjudication, for prosecution. I understand that there are those. Whether there is a will or not to actually pursue those. And I have to mention something that I'm really reluctant to do, but I will do so. I will say there has to be some accountability in the form of prosecutorial judgments because that's the only ones that we seem to understand here in the temporal world, especially in the event of our ladies who have been so molested, still missing, still going through that. Our lovely, sacrosanct ladies, yes, and those men who suffer. In the meantime, I am not advocating, I say there will be, and probably there should be, but what I'm saying is, for my part, I can only do what I can do, and that's ask and offer my services to the ability that I can, because I do a lot of counseling for people who have been incarcerated for sexual abuse and other criminal activities, so-called by Canada. But we have to remember that my traditional system of life is also very different, which has not been recognized as yet, and that's what I'm still fighting for. And we would deal with that through the healing processes that we have to deal with that. So the Canadian system, I must say, has not been really good to us either, but that's beside the point. The point is, should there be any prosecutorial processes taking place against the perpetrators? Yes, I should be, because that's what the Canadian system was based on. Ours was not based on that. Milech.
Thank you, Elder Kelly. We'll go one more just over here in the front row.
Mikach, my name is Christine, and I'm from Cree Media of Northern Quebec. I would like to ask a question to my leader, Grand Chief Mandy Gomasti. Vaja Mandy, Stephen Scumpton, Kabitsa means that Ksinianot and Haja Betsa, Mamusman, I at the Badsmon, Jibedugo, Stinim notes. Egunot Gontes Kugazimdan, Giaman. Eduksni noten ha tanis nagnigo who dehi watch the nimnods de chano euchik. Tanjeji Dane, Chim Scanats, the Datenji, Jeji Sujwetain, the Badsmoon, Jeji Sai Witaminga, Eji Simubits ha. Many of our people back home had a hard time with this trip. You as our leader coming here. When we go home, can you say that you've attained of what the purpose was for this trip? You got.
Gida, Roger. Just come Christine, just come to the Jidai Norton How, and no Tangas Kayak Janos, Badsam no, Diamono. O Jiaman Ganga Jidana Jiduxnik Oten How, and Shay Jibertot Gaujij, and that's Kakoj Goyo, Oyoga. Asku Giane Magnod, Asku de Magno de Ganashe, Emil Shet Gau Hay, Nanot, but in Shan Jibeji the good, in Tabaje Tenan, Egoe, Tiat, Niaso, Guich Hanan, Pastwajid. Gabeto Gayemet and Chow Yim Headsmau, Chidutakam Bastoyo. Nashajit Staxed. Ejin set stuck. Archio ejiwidu dagoik tiano eo Jotunhau Canada. Neske ejiwitak ewaptak eske mutadaik tiano iuitun neske enoktaik esat staik isti. Jiwitum ge ashenstunagen Canada ejabetstat colonialism ejiwikashi hak tantenhau ishnak shakjo. Neske jiwitum emustat getwi Majeitmon, as you waptak neo esprit. Jiwitum get Jiwich Gabustad no. Neske Jiwitum Nastan Munen, Etiago he, Ewitum exit Badzen Mono, Neske and Stonact, Njid Shashado Washid Nasnigante Hayek. I think that this has been a challenging journey for all of the delegates. Myself, I have encountered some instances where people did not agree. I was able to share that with my delegates. They also informed me that each one of them faced challenges with their participation. And every one of them also communicated to us that they felt that this was the right thing to do for those survivors who wanted to feel this approach being delivered to them. In the Pope's message in our encounter today, he spoke about the genuine sense of community that we exhibited as First Nations. He also spoke about his appreciation for how we showcased our culture, our spiritness, and our care for the environment. He spoke about how we were rejected ethnically, in a religious way, and discriminated, and that the colonial system was a devastation to our identity. The most powerful words that I heard him speak today was his expression of sorrow and shame on behalf of the church, and that he did confirm the church was standing with us. He acknowledged our hurts, our abuse, and our mistreatment. He expressed his respect for our communities, and he also expressed his appreciation for how we brought children forward as part of our message, and that these children were the center of what we wanted to bring in meeting him. Agada, Moja.
Before we wrap it up with a song, I'll just hand it over to Chief Antoine.
Masi. I'd like to thank the delegations that assisted in terms of sharing with you what our mission was, and also the way that each of us contributed in supporting each other to simply share those messages with His Holy Father. Today, we spoke the truth. The story of the settler state and the way in which it asserted itself here at the expense of us and our families. Although the story shines light on some dark truth, it is not intended to feed fear nor to create a sense of panic. However, it is presented to you so you can see the truth. This has been our truth. The residential school system was a program designed and implemented by the state and church and police services that utilize a destructive and vicious legal framework to implement this plan to forcibly remove our children from our homes, our nation, and ultimately from our lands and territories. The very people responsible for protecting citizens in society work together to harm our most vulnerable. Is this a crime? Is this needs to be accountable for? The Indian residential school system was designed to destroy our culture, to kill the Indian in the child. Today, we spoke the truth. Despite our collective grief and pain, there comes hope for change. I'd like to thank our ancestors, our elders, our mums and our dads, our grandpas, uncles and aunts, for modeling and also being consistent in sharing their teachings, and also really advocating the importance of our existence, sharing with us two main priorities. The first priority was with the land. The next priority has three things. The first thing is the relationship with the land. That's why we call ourselves who we are. The second one is the relationship to coordinate ourselves inside. That's why we have a very special relationship with ourselves, with our family. It's important to coordinate those things so that way we could be able to harmonize ourselves with a relationship with the land. The third relationship has to do with other people. And this is the point that we're making here. This relationship, as I was mentioning, these two fingers pointing to each other. This is the only narrative that has been told, and here we're showing you and sharing with you that we are still here despite the things that have happened to us. We have never given up, and we've been sharing you this. We are human beings. We have a special relationship with the land and the things that we have for thousands of years that we develop, that we learn. We have this to offer. In light of the climate change issues, we have these things to offer. The second thing that I wanted to share with you is that this change will bring justice and accountability for our lost and stolen little ones and their families. A change that builds a future of respect for our nation of families, self-determination in ways that support and assists us to thrive as human beings, standing proud in our culture and shared through our languages. As you can see that despite these things that happen to us, we've also learned other languages. And one of our chiefs here spoken in one language that are also very familiar this part of the world. We also learn about Greek and also Latin. The word for genocide, the G-E-N-O-S, is a Greek word. It has to make reference to nations, like our nations. The C-I-D-E is not a Greek word, but it's a Latin word. And it talks about killing. This is what genocide means. We have first-hand experience of this. And that's why we're here to tell you the truth. A change, so we need a change that builds a future of respect for our nation of families. This work requires full participation. Our culture, the way of life, is very inclusive. We will not be leaving you out. You're not going to be an afterthought or an add-on. You're going to be full participation. And it needs the full participation from all parties. And certainly, from what I learned in Rome, that it will not happen overnight. However, it must start now. We hope that this visit and a subsequent reciprocal visit from the Holy Father on our home territories where, and we're looking forward to fully host the Holy Father. And we're hoping that this will open a measure of trust, dignity, and respect to all those people that had been harmed, to those survivors, former residential school students, and including intergenerational survivors of residential school. Therefore, we encourage all global citizens who are also part of this family. We're all human beings, including all Canadians who coexist with our families, to take time to reflect as the Holy Father is doing tonight. To take time to reflect on this dark chapter in history. We're all in this together. And I also encourage you to extend a hand of support, understanding, and also love to all those that need it at this time. While this delegation is historic, and also the meeting is very divine, it is also important to think about what happens next. That's why, that's the part of the reason we are honored to have had our children and grandchildren's voices as part of our message. So I just wanted to close this with our closing message, and I'd like to again say gracias, mase, and I think in Russian or German they would say da. So I'll pass that on to you.
Thank you, Regional Chief Antoine. So I just want to thank everyone who joined us this afternoon for the briefings, and a reminder that our final press briefing of the week will take place tomorrow, Friday, April 1st. The entire delegation will meet with the Holy Father in a public audience at noon Rome time tomorrow, and our media briefing is scheduled to take place here at 3:30 p.m. local time. So as we close our briefing, I would invite Gajit Junie Fox to come forward and lead us in song. Thank you, everyone.
This song that I'm going to sing comes from my nation of the Haudenosaunee people. It was written by Bear Fox, who's Mohawk from Akwesasne, and it's a song honoring those that have passed on to the sky world. So I sing this in honor of all those young ones that didn't make it home. Yo ha yo ho ya, ana yo ho ya he. Ha yo ho ya, Hana yo hayo weya yo weya. Hana yo weya he skani gola. De wado dano yeti ye yala. Ne lona do hitsto. De yeti nu alados. Ne haguegos canas canaga. Ne galo ya gelo no. Yo ha yo we ya. Hana yo we ya skanaga. Ne galo ya gelo no. Let's put our minds together as one and remember those who have passed on to the sky world. Their life duties are complete. They are living peacefully in the sky world. In the sky world, they will never be forgotten. No more pain, no more suffering in the sky world. In the sky world.
Thank you again. Thank you for the honor to live and work with you.